I remember the sound before I saw anything. A low, endless thunder, like 1,000 storms rolling toward us from beyond the horizon. It wasn't the weather. It was June 6, 1944, the morning everything we believed about the war began to collapse. We were stationed above the beaches near Vierville-sur-Mer, part of the 352nd Infantry Division. I had turned 21 just a week before. My name was Friedrich Keller Obergefreiter, a junior corporal in the Wehrmacht. And that morning, I felt older than my father ever had. The air smelled of salt and damp earth. The night fog still clung to the cliffs, and the gulls circled lazily, unaware of what was about to happen. Our machine gun nest was quiet. I could hear the faint creak of the MG-42's metal as I checked the barrel again, hands shaking slightly. Just after 5:30, the sky began to glow, first pink, then gray. One of our sentries pointed toward the Esirati first. I thought he was wrong. Then I saw them. Dozens, no hundreds, of small black dots on the water. The horizon was alive, crawling. Warships, landing craft, and more ships behind them than I had ever imagined existed in the world. The sea itself looked armored. Our lieutenant whispered, "Mein Gott!" Someone muttered, "It's the invasion." Another soldier laughed, too loudly. It can't be all of them, but it was. The greatest armada ever assembled, and we were staring straight at it. The artillery started first. Shells screamed overhead and exploded behind us, shaking the cliffs. The bunkers shuddered, dust fell from the ceiling, and the smell of cordite and wet concrete filled the air. I remember pressing myself against the cold wall of our emplacement, covering my ears, feeling the earth tremble beneath my boots. Every explosion seemed closer than the last. I thought of home, of my mother's kitchen, of the way she used to hum when she cooked. When the shelling stopped, there was a silence so deep it hurt my ears. Then came the hum, an eerie mechanical whine that grew louder and louder. The landing craft. That I looked through the slits of our bunker and saw the first wave approaching. Tiny metal boats racing toward us, bouncing on the waves. I could see men inside them, rows of helmets and rifles packed shoulder to shoulder. American flags on the hulls. They were coming straight for us. "Wait for them to hit the beach," our lieutenant barked. We aimed our MG-42s. The barrel was hot already, even before firing. My hands trembled. Then the ramp of the first landing craft dropped. I saw faces, boys mostly, barely older than me. And in seconds, the beach turned red. We opened fire. The MG-42 screamed, its rhythm so fast it didn't sound like individual bullets anymore. Just a continuous roar. Men fell in lines. Some made it a few meters before collapsing. Others tried to drag wounded comrades. The sea foam mixed with blood. They kept coming. Another wave. Then another. And no matter how many we hit, more came out of the sea. It was like fighting the tide itself. Artillery behind us barked again. Mortars exploded among the landing craft. Smoke and sand filled the air, turning the morning into a gray nightmare. I reloaded again and again. My ears rang so loudly I couldn't hear my own breathing. After what felt like hours, one of our bunkers took a direct hit. The explosion threw me backward. I hit the concrete wall hard and everything went white for a few seconds. When I came to, I could taste blood in my mouth. Half our position was gone. The gun next to mine was twisted metal. Our radio man was screaming, his leg pinned under debris. Another soldier was firing blindly out the slit, shouting curses at the Americans he couldn't even see. We had been told to hold the beach at all costs. Now I understood what that meant. By midday, the sound of gunfire was constant, endless. The Americans had reached parts of the beach, crawling forward behind obstacles we'd placed months ago. Their tanks, those floating ones, some sank, Others somehow made it ashore. From my position, I saw one of them burning, crew trying to escape through thick black smoke. Then another explosion that I remember thinking, they're just men like us. Scared, tired, praying this ends soon. The difference was they were winning. By 2 p.m., our ammunition was running low. Communications with the command post had been cut. Every few minutes, a plane swooped overhead, strafing the cliffs. I saw a Stuka from our own side try to intervene. It never came back. Someone shouted that the Americans were flanking us from the left. I crawled to the edge of the trench and saw movement. Dozens of them, climbing the slope, throwing grenades, firing upwards. That I raised my rifle, aimed at one, then hesitated. He was so young, maybe 18. He saw me too. For a second we just stared. Then he ducked, and the moment was gone. That night I didn't sleep. None of us did. The sea still glowed from distant fires. The air was thick with the smell of oil, blood, and smoke. We could hear cries echoing from the beach. Wounded men from both sides, calling for help that never came. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Or maybe it was just the wind moving through twisted metal. I wrote a few lines in my small notebook that night. If this is victory for them, what is left for us? The morning after the landings, the beach was unrecognizable. What had once been sand and surf was now a graveyard. Twisted metal, broken helmets, burned landing craft, and the still bodies of hundreds of men. The tide came in and out, quietly reclaiming them. That I remember standing on the ridge above Omaha Beach, my rifle heavy in my hands, wondering how any of us were still alive. Our bunkers were half destroyed. The air reeked of fuel and death. Smoke hung low, thick as fog. Every step crunched on shattered glass, bullet casings, and bone fragments. No reinforcements had come. No fresh ammunition. No clear orders. Just static on the radio and the occasional distant voice yelling something none of us could understand. By mid-morning, the Americans began to move inland. They had tanks now, Shermans, dozens of them, rolling over what was left of our defenses. Our lieutenant, his arm bandaged and face streaked with dirt, gave the order to retreat toward Colleville. Fall back, regroup in the hedgerows, he shouted. Though most of the men barely heard him. We ran. Through the smoke, through the chaos, through fields that had once belonged to quiet French farmers. Cows lay dead in the grass, fences shattered, trees torn apart by artillery fire. Every few minutes we dropped to the ground as shells exploded nearby. That I remember looking back once, just once, and seeing the Americans raising their flag on the beach. That sight hit harder than any bullet could. We reached a narrow sunken lane bordered by hedges, thick, high, almost like walls of green. Normandy's bocage. We set up there, exhausted. I counted only 7 of us left from the 20 in our section the day before. No one spoke for a long time. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Finally, one of the younger soldiers whispered, "They'll never stop, will they?" Our lieutenant just shook his head. "No, but neither will we." He was lying. We all knew it by afternoon. The sky filled with the distant hum of engines again. We thought maybe the Luftwaffe had come. But it wasn't them. It was more of them, American transports and fighters, flying over in perfect formations. I counted what must have been hundreds. They dropped more paratroopers behind us. The road we had just come from was now cut off. We were surrounded, and the realization hit like ice in my veins. We tried to dig in, setting up an MG-42 between 2 hedgerows. The sun was hot, the air buzzing with flies. Every sound made me flinch. A branch snapping, a bird taking off, then, without warning, machine gun fire ripped through the lane. Dirt exploded beside me. We dropped flat. "Positions!" The lieutenant shouted. That I swung the MG around and fired blind into the bushes ahead. The return fire came instantly, short, disciplined bursts. American infantry. Close. For almost 20 minutes, it was chaos. We shouted, fired, reloaded, and shouted again. One of our men, Ernst, was hit in the throat. He made no sound, just clutched at the wound and fell back. The hedgerow burned from tracer rounds, smoke curling upward like dark fingers. When it finally went quiet again, I could hear moaning. Not from us, from the other side. The lieutenant crawled forward, then signaled for silence. I held my breath in the distance. A man's voice called out in English. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't anger. It was fear. For the first time in the war, I realized they were just as terrified as we were. That night we stayed hidden in the hedgerows. The stars were bright above the black fields, but we barely looked up. Every few minutes, flares went off somewhere to the west, bathing the countryside in ghostly white light. Each flare revealed new shadows, new movement, and each time, my heart stopped as I thought of home again. My father's orchard. My younger brother, Hans, who'd been sent east the year before, that I wondered if he was still alive. The lieutenant passed around our last tin of rations, cold beans and bread that tasted like sand. He told us, quietly, "We'll try to move south at dawn." I didn't answer. I just watched the horizon. Somewhere far off, the sea still burned up by morning. The mist returned, soft, gray, and strangely peaceful. We crawled out of the ditch, weapons ready. The fields around us were littered with wreckage. Gliders, parachutes caught in trees, and the bodies of men who hadn't made it. One of our soldiers, Wilhelm, bent down and pulled a photograph from a dead paratrooper's pocket. It was a picture of a woman and two children. He stared at it for a long time before folding it and putting it back. "Nobody should die this far from home," he muttered. By noon, we were retreating again, deeper into the countryside. The Americans were everywhere now, moving fast, efficient, unstoppable. Planes strafed the roads, and we had to hide in barns or ditches every few kilometers. The locals watched us pass with blank faces. Some spat. Others just looked away. That I couldn't blame them. For years we'd been told we were bringing order, unity, a new Europe. But here, on these quiet French roads, all I saw was the cost of that lie. When night fell, we took shelter in a bombed farmhouse. There was no roof left, just stars overhead. We lit no fire. The lieutenant sat silently in a corner, staring at nothing. That I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the sea again. That endless line of ships, the flashing guns, the boys dying on the sand. That I realized then that this was the beginning of the end. We all knew it, and no one said it, but deep down, even the most loyal among us could feel it. The Reich was dying, and we were its witnesses. The third day after the landings began, I no longer knew what hour it was. The sky had been gray for so long that it felt like the sun had vanished from Normandy. Smoke hung in the air like fog. The ground beneath my boots was soft from blood and rain. We had been walking for what felt like forever, south, always south, trying to escape the tightening circle of American troops. Our division, the 352nd, was no longer a division. It was fragments of men, groups of 5 or 6, scattered across the countryside, clinging to any kind of cover. I was with 3 others now. Wilhelm, who limped from shrapnel in his thigh. Otto, a quiet man who hadn't spoken since the second day. And our lieutenant, whose uniform was ripped and face burned from the blast that had killed half our unit. We didn't march anymore. We just moved. Slowly, quietly. Every sound in the hedgerows made us freeze. By dawn, the fields around us echoed with distant gunfire. The Americans were advancing through every lane, every village, every orchard. You could hear their engines. Those deep, steady roars of Sherman tanks and trucks. At one point, we saw them from a ridge, columns of vehicles stretching as far as the eye could see. It was like watching a living machine, vast and relentless, rolling forward across France. Our lieutenant whispered. So this is how empires die. Not with one battle, but 1,000 small defeats. No one answered. There was nothing left to say. We passed through a small farm on the edge of the woods. The house was half destroyed. Chickens wandered through the ruins. On the door hung a white cloth. Surrender. Inside, we found an old man and his wife. They didn't scream. They didn't move. They just watched us. For soldiers covered in mud, stubble, and fear, like ghosts passing through their lives. The lieutenant asked for water. The old man pointed to a bucket by the well. Wilhelm drank first. Then I did. The water tasted of rust and ash. When we left, the old woman said something in French. I didn't understand, but her tone said everything. It wasn't hate, it was pity. Around midday, we heard a sound none of us expected. A German voice, coming from a radio. A field broadcast. The lieutenant turned up the volume and we listened. Hold all positions. Reinforcements are on their way. The Führer has promised new panzer divisions will arrive to push the invaders back into the sea. We looked at each other. Even Otto let out a bitter laugh. We all knew it was a lie. The panzers weren't coming. The Luftwaffe barely existed anymore. We were alone in these fields. Abandoned by promises spoken from marble offices hundreds of kilometers away. That afternoon, we hid in a barn while fighter planes strafed the road outside. Each burst of machine gun fire tore through the wooden walls, filling the air with splinters. We lay flat, faces in the dirt. When it ended, the lieutenant finally spoke. His voice was low, hoarse. We're not fighting for the Reich anymore, he said. We're fighting for survival, for each other. I looked at him, then at the others for the first time. I believed him. By the fourth night, we reached St. Lo. Or what was left of it. The town was in ruins. Streets cratered, buildings collapsed, the church tower split in half. Fires burned everywhere, lighting the clouds from below. We moved through the rubble like shadows. The sound of gunfire echoed from every direction. It wasn't a city anymore. It was a maze of death. In one alley, we came across a young soldier, barely 16, trembling, clutching a rifle too big for him. He looked at us like we were saviors. What do we do, Herr Lieutenant? He asked. Our officer paused, then said quietly, Find a way home if you can. The boy nodded and ran into the smoke. We never saw him again. That night, we slept in the basement of a half-collapsed house. The walls dripped with moisture. The floor was cold stone. Above us, the distant rumble of tanks never stopped. Wilhelm couldn't sleep. His leg was getting worse. He whispered to me, Do you think anyone will remember us? I said nothing, because deep down, I already knew the answer. They would remember the invasion, the liberation, the heroes, but not us. We were the shadows behind history's light at dawn. The lieutenant woke us. Get ready, he said. We move again. His voice had changed. There was no authority left in it. Only exhaustion. I helped Wilhelm stand, and together we stepped out into the gray morning. The streets of St. Lo were filled with smoke through it. I saw silhouettes moving. American soldiers, methodical, cautious, clearing each house one by one. We didn't fire. We didn't even raise our weapons. There was no point anymore. We turned and disappeared into the countryside again. Toward the forests, away from the roads, deeper into the quiet. That day, I realized something I would never forget. We had lost the war long before we lost the battle. It wasn't the Americans who defeated us first. It was our own belief, the blind faith that we were fighting for something worth dying for. The beaches had shown me the truth. No cause built on lies can survive the moment real men start dying for it. The countryside was quiet again, too quiet. After the chaos of St. Lo, the silence felt wrong. like the world had paused to remember what it had just witnessed. And no planes, no shelling, no shouting. Only the rustle of leaves and the soft hum of insects among the hedges. We had escaped the city by crawling through a drainage canal at dawn. The smell of sewage, blood, and death clung to us even after we reached open fields. My uniform was stiff with dried mud and smoke. My rifle, once a weapon, was now just extra weight I could barely lift. There were only 3 of us left now: the lieutenant, Wilhelm, and me. Otto had been hit by shrapnel the night before. He didn't die immediately, but by morning he wasn't breathing anymore. We buried him near an apple tree on the edge of a farm. No ceremony, no cross, just a few words whispered in the mist. "Rest, comrade," the lieutenant said. His voice broke for the first time since the invasion began. We walked for hours that day, moving south through the maze of hedgerows that surrounded every field. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of manure and smoke. The distant sounds of artillery echoed like thunder from somewhere far behind us. Normandy still burning, did I remember the strange beauty of it. Flowers blooming beside blackened tanks, birds perched on shattered branches, life stubbornly growing where death had passed. War makes you see the world differently. Every blade of grass looks sharper. Every sound feels louder. And you start to realize how fragile everything truly is. We stopped by a small stream to rest. Wilhelm's leg was swollen and red, the wound festering. He tried to hide the pain, but I could see it in his eyes. The lieutenant tore a strip from his shirt to make a new bandage. "We'll find help soon," he said. Though there was no conviction in his voice, I knelt by the stream and splashed water on my face. For a moment, I saw my reflection. Gaunt, filthy, eyes hollow. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. I wasn't a soldier anymore, I was just someone trying not to die. That afternoon, we reached another village. Or what was left of one. Houses stood roofless, walls cracked open like eggshells. A horse lay dead in the square, its ribs exposed, flies buzzing thick around it. A church bell lay on the ground beside its tower, half buried in rubble. We found a well still intact and filled our canteens. Then we heard footsteps. The lieutenant raised his pistol. A door creaked open and an old French priest stepped out. Holding his hands up, he looked at us, not with fear, but with weary sadness. "Vous avez perdu," he said softly. "It is over." The lieutenant lowered his weapon slowly. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then the priest pointed toward a barn on the edge of the village. "There is food there," he said in broken German. "You can rest, but go before night." We nodded. None of us thanked him, but we all felt the same quiet gratitude. Inside the barn, we found a few sacks of grain and some dry bread. It tasted like dust, but it was the first food we'd had in 2 days. We sat in silence, chewing slowly. The lieutenant leaned against the wall, eyes half closed. "I used to believe in everything," he said quietly. "In the fatherland, in duty, in honor. Now I only believe in surviving the night." Wilhelm let out a dry laugh. "Then maybe that's all that's left worth believing in." For a long time, none of us said anything else. That evening we moved again, following a dirt road lined with poplars. The setting sun turned the sky orange and red. The same colors as the flames that had lit the beaches 3 days earlier. We passed a burned-out convoy, German trucks, riddled with bullet holes. Inside one, I saw the body of a driver still sitting upright, hands gripping the wheel as if refusing to let go. It struck me then. The war wasn't something happening around us anymore. We were the war, the last scattered pieces of a dying machine that no one controlled anymore. When darkness fell, we took shelter in a farmhouse. The roof was half gone, but the walls still stood. I found a child's toy on the floor, a wooden soldier missing an arm. I turned it over in my hand and thought of my little brother, Hans. He'd had one just like it before he left for the Eastern Front, that I wondered if he was alive, that I wondered if he ever thought of me. Outside, the night was alive with the distant rumble of tanks and the faint pop of gunfire. But for the first time in days, I wasn't afraid, that I was just numb. Near midnight, Wilhelm began to shake. His fever had gotten worse. The lieutenant tried to keep him quiet, whispering, "Hold on, Junge, hold on." But we both knew he wouldn't die by dawn. He was gone. We buried him behind the farmhouse, using a broken shovel we found in the yard. The soil was wet and heavy. The lieutenant placed Wilhelm's dog tag on a small branch and stuck it into the ground. Then he said simply, "That's 3 of us now." After the burial, the lieutenant turned to me. "There's no point in heading south anymore," he said. "The Americans are everywhere. Maybe if we go east, maybe we can find what's left of the lines." But there were no lines anymore, only broken men wandering across ruined land, each pretending there was still a purpose to all of it. I looked at him, at the dirt, the exhaustion, the 1,000-yard stare, and realized that even he knew it was over. He just couldn't admit it out loud. We started walking east, through fields shining with morning dew. The sun rose over Normandy, warm and golden. Somewhere far behind us, artillery thundered again. The sound of another village falling, another chapter. Ending. I didn't turn back. Not anymore, because I knew the truth now. What we had built was crumbling, and no one, not even the most loyal, could stop it. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. The days after Wilhelm's death blurred together. A long stretch of gray mornings and sleepless nights. We were ghosts by then, moving through a landscape that no longer belonged to us. The lieutenant and I kept walking east, through orchards and ruined villages, past burned-out vehicles and fields littered with helmets, rifles, and letters that would never be delivered. Everywhere we went, the same sight repeated itself. Abandoned posts, uniforms tossed in ditches, white cloths tied to sticks fluttering in the wind. The army that once stretched from France to Russia was dissolving, not in one grand defeat, but quietly, piece by piece. And yet we walked, because movement felt like the only thing keeping us alive. By the 5th day after D-Day, food was almost gone. The countryside, though beautiful, was stripped bare. The civilians had hidden everything or fled. We survived on apples, raw grain, and water from muddy ditches. One afternoon, as we crossed a field, we saw smoke rising from a farmhouse ahead. The lieutenant raised his hand for silence and crouched low. Through the tall grass, we spotted them, American soldiers, maybe a dozen of them, resting by their trucks, laughing, smoking. For a moment, we just watched them. They didn't look like the monsters our propaganda had described. They looked human. One was reading a letter. Another cleaned his rifle with the slow patience of routine. That I wondered if they were thinking of home the same way we were. Then the lieutenant whispered, "Let's move around them." Quietly. We did, step by step, through the grass, our hearts pounding. For a second, I thought of raising my hands, walking toward them, ending it there. But I didn't. Not yet. We reached a small forest by nightfall. The moonlight shimmered through the branches, silver on the damp leaves. We found an old hunting cabin and decided to rest inside. Inside, it smelled of mold and wetwood. We sat by the doorway, too tired to talk. The lieutenant finally broke the silence. "I used to believe we were fighting for something greater than ourselves," he said softly. "Now I wonder if any of it ever truly existed, or if we were just following orders written by ghosts." I didn't answer. I just stared into the dark woods and listened to the night. Somewhere out there, an owl call. It sounded like morning. Dawn. I woke to find the lieutenant gone. His pack was still there, his helmet too, but his pistol was missing. I ran outside and found him by the stream behind the cabin. He sat on a fallen log, staring at the water, his Luger resting on his knee. For a moment, I thought he was already dead. Then he looked up at me and smiled. A strange, tired smile. "It's over," he said quietly. "I can't go back. I can't go forward. There's nothing left but this." I took a step forward. "Herr Lieutenant." He shook his head slowly. "Go east," he said. "You're young. Maybe you'll make it home. Maybe you'll see peace again." Then he lifted the pistol, pressed it to his temple, and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the trees, sharp and final. Birds scattered from the branches above that I stood there for a long time, unable to move. When I finally did, I took his dog tag and buried him by the stream, covering the grave with leaves. Then I walked away. Alone, for 2 more days, I wandered through the countryside that I no longer avoided the roads or hid from the plains if they found me. So be it that I saw columns of prisoners marching west, hundreds of Germans under American guard, their hands raised, faces pale with exhaustion, that I joined them without a word, and no one asked my name, and no one cared. We were just part of the endless tide of surrender. The camp they brought us to was near Corentin. Rows of barbed wire, wooden watchtowers, and canvas tents, stretching into the distance. The Americans weren't cruel. They gave us food, water, even cigarettes. But it wasn't kindness I felt. It was emptiness. At night, I lay awake, listening to the murmurs of men who no longer believed in anything. Some prayed. Others cursed. Most said nothing at all, and in the silence, I kept hearing the sound of the sea. That thunder from the morning of June 6th, the day the world changed forever. Weeks later, we were loaded onto trucks and sent inland. Normandy faded behind us, replaced by endless fields and the strange, quiet order of captivity. I remember looking out the back of the truck as it drove away and seeing the coastline in the distance, that same horizon where the ships had come. The same sea that had brought death had now brought me life, and I realized something then. Something I never forgot. We had lost more than a war. We had lost ourselves. The uniforms, the flags, the speeches, they had all burned away, leaving only what we truly were. Men who wanted to live. Years later, after the war, I returned to Normandy. The beaches were quiet again. Tourists walking where we once fought, children playing in the sand where men had died. I stood on the cliff where my bunker once stood. The wind was strong. The sea calmed. I closed my eyes and heard the echoes of that morning one last time. The gunfire, the shouting, the waves hitting the shore. And then, I let it go. Because in the end, history belongs not to those who fought the longest, but to those who survived to remember.